Hey party people, Techno here again back at the Sans Holiday Hack Challenge 2022, and in this video we're going to tackle the final challenge of the Cloud Ring area and retrieve the Cloud Ring. Please forgive my voice during this video, I'm getting over a bit of a Kringle cold. Yeah, bad jokes, I got them. But I promise I am working on audio overall, sicknesses aside. So let's go ahead and jump into the badge here to take a look at what our objective is for this final challenge. And to recover the Cloud Ring, we are looking at exploitation via AWS CLI. And this comes in at 3 Christmas trees out of 5, so medium difficulty challenge here. And our objective is to flex some more advanced AWS CLI skills to escalate privileges. So if we help Gertie Snowborough, which we did in the last video, in the Cloud Ring, we'll get hints for this challenge. Let's go ahead and take a look at those. And we have 2 hints here for AWS CLI 201 that are relevant to this challenge. So one is attached user policies. AWS inline policies pertain to one identity, while managed policies can be attached to many identities. And here we have a link to the documentation for those inline policies. The second hint we have is IAM privilege escalation. So we can try the S3 API or Lambda service commands, and then Chris Elgie's talk on AWS and IAM might be a good place to start, with of course a link to that talk. And these commands are definitely something we will use during this challenge. But without further ado, let's head up to the top level of this cloud/slot smog machine thing and get started. And on the way there, I'll point out that we can hop right through this wall here to retrieve that chest that's up there, get some more Kringle coin, get some more goodies. And once we reach the top of this extraordinarily high ladder, we will join Soul Fraud next to this Cranberry Pi terminal and jump into this final challenge. So as we've seen many times before, we have a split terminal here with the top giving us instructions as to what we want to accomplish or what our objective is, and the bottom area being where we can execute these commands. And the first task that we are given is to use the truffle hog command to find credentials in the GitLab instance at hogfactory.com/a snowball/aws_scripts.git, just like we did in the previous one. And then we're going to configure these credentials for US East 1 and run AWS STS get caller identity on that. So let's just kick this off by running that truffle hog command. We're going to run truffle hog, and I'm going to grab the URL here for this. And we're going to have to add the get argument to this as well to get the output that we're looking for. And I think I have an extra space in there, so let me just eliminate that and we'll get this running. So we already are getting some results back, and again, we saw this in the previous challenge, but here we have some credentials that were found in this putpolicy.py file, and that is in this particular git commit. We're going to have to dig a little bit deeper here though, because of course, if we want to do AWS configure, we're not only going to need the user identity, but we're going to need the secret access key, and then we can also input our region, of course. But we're going to have to dig a little bit deeper into this. So let's go ahead and clone this repo. And then jump into that. And if we cat the putpolicy.py file, what we're going to see is actually those access keys and secret access key are obfuscated. But if we go back to the output of the truffle hog command, so let me run this again so we can get a fresh view of that. We're going to see that this points us to a particular commit. So let's check out that commit and see what we can find in addition to this user ID here. So we'll just grab this commit and let's do a git checkout on that commit. Okay, now let's see what happens when we cat push, or the push policy. What was the file called? Don't even remember. Putpolicy.py. So here we can see we have that AWS access key in clear text, and we also have the secret access key. So we're well on our way now. Now we can run AWS configure. And just copy those values in like we did before. Get that secret access key. And finally, US East 1 for our region. And we don't care about the output format. And now we can run AWS STS get caller identity. All right, and that is the first objective down. So now what we're looking at is managed, think shared, policies can be attached to multiple users. Use the AWS CLI to find any policies attached to your user. The AWS IAM command to list attached user policies can be found here. We have a link to the documentation. And then we also have an additional hint that this is not the, as you may suspect, list user policies command. So at this point, the rest of this challenge kind of bounces back and forth between referencing documentation to get the appropriate commands and then inputting those values. But the documentation is great to review. I'm going to bypass the documentation and we're going to go right into what these commands are that we need. And this one is going to be AWS IAM and list attached user policies. And now we're going to have to pass an argument to this in terms of the username. So we're going to do a tac user tac name. And the username we're going to have here is hog, as we can see from our STS output. Great, so that brings back this additional data. We have our policy name and we also have our policy resource name. And the next objective that we have is now view or get the policy that is attached to your user. And again, we're going to be using the AWS IAM command to get a policy, can be found here in this documentation. And what that command is going to be is AWS IAM get policy with a couple additional arguments. The first of which is username. And then we're going to add our policy name, which we have from the output right here. So we can just grab this, copy, paste that in. And the last argument is going to be the policy ARN, or Amazon resource name, which is also in the previous output that we just pulled back. And once we run that, great. Now we have some additional output that we're going to be leveraging. And it's the next objective here states attached policies can have multiple versions. View the default version of this policy. So again, we're back to the AWS IAM command, another link to documentation here. But this next command that we're going to run is going to be quite similar, but we're just going to have to add and change some arguments in here. So we are going to use an AWS IAM get policy version. And we can drop the username argument, but we're going to have to add a version ID argument. And we can see that the default version ID in the output is this v1, pretty simple. And again, more output. And the next objective, inline policies are policies that are unique to a particular identity or resource. Use the AWS CLI to list the inline policies associated with your user. And now we have the AWS IAM command is still the one that we're going to be working with here. More documentation and another hint that it is not the list attached user policies that we're looking for here. But what we are looking for is the list user policies. So this is going to be AWS IAM list user policies. And then, of course, our username as the argument. And now we can see that the policy name that we get back is S3 perms here. And we have our next objective. Use the AWS CLI to get the only inline policy for your user, still using the AWS IAM command. More documentation. And the next command that we're going to need to run here is the get user policy command. And this is going to be AWS IAM get user policy. And again, the username is going to be hog. Or I'm sorry. No, actually for this one, we not only need the username hog, but we need to specify the policy name that we're looking for, which is that S3 perms. And this pulls back some additional information here. And the next objective that we have is inline user policy named S3 perms disclose the name of an S3 bucket that we have permission to list objects for. Now we want to list those objects. And this is where we start to get into the S3 API. So the AWS S3 API command to list the objects in the S3 bucket can be found here in this documentation. And what that command is going to be is AWS S3 API list objects. And for this, we're going to have to pass the argument of the bucket. And that's going to be that smog machines 3 that we see in the output here. All right, on to the next one. So the attached user policy provided you several Lambda privileges. Use the AWS CLI to list Lambda functions. And here we have another command. The AWS Lambda command can list those functions, and we can find out in this documentation here. And what we're going to do to list those functions is quite simply AWS Lambda list functions. So we can see that we have some additional functions that we can list here. And actually, since the output is so long, it's kind of run off the screen. So I'm going to pipe this into less one more time so that we can see what the beginning of this is. And you'll see at the very top of this output here, we have the functions and the function name. So the function name is smogmachine_lambda. And this is the function that we're going to list. We want to find out the URL. So Lambda functions can have a public URL from which they are directly accessible. Use the AWS CLI to get the configuration containing the public URL of the Lambda function. And we're going to, again, use the AWS Lambda command for this. And this is where we need to know what the function name is. So what we're going to run here for the last command that we have to run for this challenge is AWS Lambda get function URL config, and then pass the function name as an argument. Which is that smogmachine_lambda. And I messed something up there. Oh, I see my typo. Yep. Forgot the U on URL. So you will not work with that syntax error. And there we go. And that's it. So that is how we retrieve the Cloud Ring. We're on to the next one. So for as far as my video tutorials go, I think there's only really 1 or 2 more challenges because I ran out of time. I did not finish the final set of challenges, just 1 or 2 relating to blockchain, and we'll wrap those up in the coming videos. So until then, thank you very much for watching. Take care, everyone. I will talk to you later.